Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host, Gersh1, and today we're going to be talking about the Imperial Knights. More specifically, the most common pattern of knight suits that exist within the 42nd millennium. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We post Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day. If you guys like what we do and would like to support us, link in the description for you guys to get your own objective markers or support us on Patreon. It's just $1 a month. And if you guys have any suggestions, please comment down below. But with that said, let's get into 40 facts on the Imperial Knights. To the sound of fanfare and ground-shaking footfalls, the mighty war engines of the Questor Imperialis, often referred to as the Imperial Knights, stride onto the battlefield. Enemy fire clangs harmlessly off their armor, or flares brilliantly as protective ion shields repel incoming shots. When the knights bring their blades and cannons to bear, even the bravest of foes quake in fear. These knights have been defending their world since before the Emperor founded the Imperium. During the dark age of technology, mankind spread outward from Terra, venturing deep into the galaxy in search of life-supporting planets. They paid a high price for their conquests. In addition to hostile flora and fauna, they found many alien races that begrudged mankind's intrusion and saw them as a new kind of prey. To protect themselves, the settlers used their standard template constructs, or STC, these miracles of technology that allowed them to produce objects without the need for skilled engineers. The most impressive of all defenses were the knights, enormous bipedal walkers crewed by a single pilot. Knight suits did more than just protect colonists. The throne mechanicum, or the mechanisms that allowed warriors to bond within their suits, also implanted notions of honor, duty, and fealty within the psyche of those who piloted a knight for any length of time. This nobility, instilled by the original engineers of the knights, the technologically literate ancient humans, shaped these societies and drove knights towards the glory of heroism in battle. Eventually, the expansion of mankind was dealt a severe blow when a new era descended, the terrible period known as the Long Night, or the Age of Strife. Worlds were left to fend for themselves, and many were destroyed by an influx of warp storms and demons. However, a surprising number of night worlds, as they became known, clung to existence despite all odds. During the millennia of isolation, the Knight Defenders established lines of nobles that ruled over feudal societies. Some 5,000 years later, the Great Crusade, the Emperor's campaign to reclaim mankind's long-lost colonies, spread across the galaxy and reconnected with those once secluded worlds. Many factions of the newborn Imperium sought to assimilate the Night Worlds, particularly the Adeptus Mechanicus of Mars. Many knight households, including the most powerful of their kind, known as the Great Houses, were brought into the imperial fold during this time. The nobles on each night world owe their allegiance to one of its knightly households, each a self-contained organization ruled over by a leader, often called a High King, but sometimes known as other titles, such as Ritter or Patriarch. Those night worlds most closely aligned with the Adeptus Mechanicus typically use the title of Princeps. It is these leaders that call for war, either in the defense of their planet, to aid the Imperium, or due to any reason outlined by the Code Chivalric. Directly beneath the High King in rank are the Barons, and a large knightly house can have many of these. Each Baron commands a stronghold or a vital territory that is a lord in his own right, ruling over knightly vassals that can be called upon for war. A High King will ask the most powerful of Barons, or Baron Primes, to join his exalted court. Many Imperial commanders have reservations when their troops are joined by members of the Questor Imperialis, for their archaic ways and ceremonies are at best inconvenient. Such complaints quickly dry up, however, when they witness the knights in action. A lone knight can engage a tank squadron and emerge victorious, or a lance formation of knights can reduce entire armies to ruin. There are many marks of knight suits, and each comes with their own speciality. The following are the most common found within the current 42nd millennium. Let's begin with the Knight's Paladin. The Knight's Paladin are a common sight in the Imperium of man's armies, most often seen surrounded by supporting Scutari legions or Astra Militarum regiments. The Paladin-class Knight suit is a perfectly balanced combination of speed, firepower, and armor, a supreme example of combat design. Those nobles who pilot Knight Paladins pride themselves in being able to perform any battlefield assignment. The Paladin's rapid-fire battle cannon grants the Knight the capacity to provide long-range fire support, delivering volley after volley of massive shells onto the foe. However, while a Paladin excels in artillery or anti-armored role, it is also suited to close-range assaults. The Paladin's bipedal design, agility, and speed allows it to engage the foe quickly, often by moving through or over terrain that would slow down any conventional vehicle. Its massive Reaper chainsword can hack through even the iron hull plates of an Orc Gorkonaut with ease. while a single thrust from the powerful servo motors can embed the blade deep into a ferrocrete bunker, ripping apart the defensive structure and slaughtering any occupants. Should enemy infantry attempt to overrun the Knight Paladin, the suit's pair of heavy stubbard, one projecting from a ball turret and the other mounted alongside the mighty rapid-fire battle cannon, send forth suppressive bullet sprays, allowing the armored giant to mow down any foe that manages to avoid its crushing feet. And then there are the Knight's Crusader. A Crusader-class knight is suited for long-range warfare, where the enormous knight advances to the optimal firing position, braces its mighty legs, and lets loose death, which sounds kinda gross. Blazing away with 2 weapons, a Crusader sends forth fuselage of heavy shells from its Avenger Gatling cannon, sketching deadly patterns across the foe's frontage. Its other weapons, a thermal cannon, causes the very air to sizzle as it hisses out blasts that can reduce a squad of Chaos Terminators to bubbling slag. With each sector it clears, the Crusader's steady advance brings new targets under its sight, and it continues to fire with every new stride. The priority for a Knight Crusader is to find a wide-open field of fire, and if the noble pilot gives any concern to his own shelter, it is but an afterthought. Each such warrior has long ago learned to trust in the strength of its Crusader ion shield, and his own skill to position it to halt the worst of incoming firepower. Should the enemy press forward too closely, the Knight Crusader bears a heavy stubbard, in addition to the considerable crushing power of its stomping gait. There are some Knight Crusaders who opt out for an even longer range weapon, exchanging their thermal cannon for a rapid-firing battle cannon, thus pulverizing enemy battle lines at a great distance, saturating them with high explosives. And then we get into the Knight's Gallant. Impetuous, mad, beyond bellicose, these words and more have been used to describe the Knight's Gallant, for they are considered by the majority of their peers to be the most reckless and combatant of all Imperial Knights, proving themselves to be even more headstrong than those nobles who pilot Knights errant. Man and machine have shared the same traits. They are aggressive, bold, and difficult, if not impossible to restrain. They long to attack, and will do so with unrelenting fervor. A noble destined to pilot a Knight Gallant will learn 3 basic tenets when he is bonded with his throne mechanicum. Depending upon the specific Knight household or the ancient heritage of the throne, these commandments might be phrased in many different ways, but they all boil down to the same 3 truisms. Trust in your ion shield, make all speed towards the foe, and strike swift and sure. Equipped exclusively for close-range combat, a Knight Gallant will thus charge headlong at the foe, its immense strides allowing the bipedal giant to cover the battlefield swiftly. Once a Knight Gallant closes the distance, the towering walker can unleash the full measure of his adamantium fury. The Reaper chainsword deals death. Long sweeping arcs of the blade will scythe down infantry or destroy light vehicles, while brutal stabs effortlessly chew straight through the battle tanks or enemy walkers. Yet a Knight Gallant does not live by his blade alone, for in his other arm he bears a Thunderstrike gauntlet. This weapon, surrounded by a sparkling nimbus of power, can deliver the coup de grace to anything on the battlefield. Its thunderclap impact can punch straight through any amount of armored plating, ripping the heart out of an enormous beast, or flipping vehicles, sending them tumbling and crashing onto their roofs. During the suppression wars of Daleks, the sheer might of the Thunderstrike gauntlet was put on theatrical display for all to see. Furious at the slaughter created upon his mechanicum allies by a traitor tank company, Baron Winston of House Trask closed quickly. He sliced his blade and stomped his way through the armored lines until he reached the command vehicle. Using his Thunderstrike gauntlet, Winston swiped down the rebels' vile banner before thrusting his fist straight through the tank's armor to pluck out the company leader. The enemy shot flares off Winston's ion shield as the Baron lifted his foe high for all to see, before squeezing and discarding the remains with anger. The remaining traitors fled like cowards, and so began the rout and the merciless pursuit that only ended with every last rebel being slain. Although geared towards close combat, all Knights Gallant also bear a single ball turret mounted weapon. Typically, this is a heavy stubbard, its flurry of rounds used to pin down the foe before a simple charge, or to decimate hordes attempting to swamp the knight through weight of numbers. Some Knights Gallant opt instead to use a melt-a-gun, using its sheer heat to dispatch tanks at close range. It's not unusual to see Knights Gallants augment their limited firepower with the addition of a carapace-mounted weapon. The Iron Storm missile pod has proven especially effective at halting attempts by infantry to swarm over a knight, with a barrage capable of scattering even the most determined of incoming foes. When a household formation of Knights Gallants take to the battlefield, they are sure to attract a disproportionate amount of enemy firepower. Indeed, most foes will do anything they can in hopes of preventing the knights from reaching their front lines. Since the Great Crusade, there have been many tales of the devastation created by these aggressive knights, for their bold and reckless attacks have made them famous across the galaxy. It was actually a trio of knights gallant that counterattacked the Tyranid invasion of Godrisphere, plowing headlong into a siege-breaking line of carnifexes, blunting the Xeno offensive in a spectacularly bloody fashion. Even the great conqueror Macarius is said to have favored the gallant lance formation above all others for breaking enemy battle lines. Many knight houses, including House Raven and Volker, use Knight's Warden as a breakthrough force to eradicate enemy strongholds. This tactic is especially effective in dense terrain, such as battles that take place within the confines of a hive city, a manufactorum, or a thick jungle. Whether clearing hab blocks or advancing beneath tightly packed alien canopies, the heavy thudding footfall and wiring drones of the high-velocity Avenger Gatling cannon let friend and foe alike know that the Knight Warden has arrived. The highly feared Avenger Gatling cannon is like an oversized assault cannon, though its larger caliber shells are more destructive and its rate of fire is even more prodigious. A single blazing volley from the rotary weapon can stitch a pattern of death across the foe's battle lines, causing charges to falter and fail, and destroy entire attack columns of light vehicles. In support of this already lethal weapon, the Avenger Gatling cannon has a built-in heavy flamer to flush out foes from cover. Any enemy that can get through the curtain of deadly fire laid down by a Knight Warden must then seek to avoid the wide-sweeping blows of its signature close combat weapon, the Reaper Chainsword. This massive chain-toothed blade is typically used to destroy the largest of targets, slicing apart battle tanks or delivering the killing blow to a Titan-class foe. It is this combination of mid-range firepower and close assault capabilities that make the Knight Warden such a formidable adversary and so popular amongst its allies. Upon realizing that they cannot match the might of the Imperial Knight, many of mankind's enemies will attempt to overrun the war engine with weight of numbers, or probe around their more vulnerable flanks. It is against tactics such as these that the Knight Warden truly comes into its own, thanks to the volume of firepower it can carry. Should fast foes such as Tau Piranhas or Orc Warbuggies strike around the Knight's formation's flank, seeking to compromise the Walker's ion shields, they will find that the Knight Warden is a formidable obstacle. Tracking the oncoming foe, the Knight Warden will fire short bursts from its Avenger, quickly and effectively turning such lightly armored vehicles into burning wreckages. Because of their desire for engaging enemies at close quarters, many Knight Wardens also sport a turret-mounted heavy stubbard upon their shoulder plate. So armed, Knight's Warden have proven especially effective at halting orc charges or eradicating even the greatest swarms of creatures that are the hallmark of most Tyranid invasions. It is not uncommon for some Knight's Warden to bear a Thunderstrike gauntlet in lieu of their murderous Reaper, using energy-crackling powers of its prodigious blows to hammer apart even the mightiest of foes. The Avenger Lance formation, made famous by House Turin, has been known to feature a trio of knights armed in this fashion, which proved well during the demon tide of the 33rd millennium, when 3 imperial sectors were overrun by a vast army of the Immaterium, referred fearfully as the Demon Tide. Deploying into the Demon's Path, 5 knightly houses, led by the renowned nobles of House Turin, formed a bastion to halt the rampage. Using swift-looping packs, High Queen Desmodara Turin channeled the demons through the shattered valley of Godsmote. As the warp-born creatures spilled onto the hollowed plains, they were subjected to the thunderous bombardment by 24 knights. The demon casualties were phenomenal, yet with no concept of fear, they surged onward to exact revenge. Over 600 Questoris-class knights stormed out to meet them, enduring barrages of sorcerer's flames and filth that sent towering knight suits toppling to the ground. With Queen Desmodara and her exalted court at a lance point, the knights slammed into the still vast demonic horde. They carved a path of annihilation to its heart, the ground shaking beneath their tread, unclean ichor drenching their legs. Though immateric fiends and cascading warp energies tore down one knight after another, their momentum was unstoppable. At last, with Reaper Chainswords howling and Thunderstrike gauntlets crackling, the exalted court of 3 knight houses engaged the masters of the Demon Tide. The battle that followed was so grandiose and catastrophic that it spawned hundreds of songs, tales, and tapestries. Several heroic knights were slain by the enormous Great Unclean One, Polothrax, before knights, known as the Master of Iron and the Fellbreaker, successfully pinned the foul abomination with their Thundercoil harpoons. With their quarry unable to move, the knights hacked the mighty demon apart. Polothrax's banishment spelled the end of the Demon Tide, though they wreaked much more destruction before they finally faded back into the warp. It is on this day that Polothrax's unending grudge against House Turin and all of their descendants was born. And then there's House Volker, who employs several knights wardens for bunker-busting besiegements. And none more famous than Lady Luxius, who displays bare adamantium armor plates on her Knight Warden, Unalloyed Victory. This is considered a deeply significant tribute by her house. She earned this honor during a fierce fighting on the death world of Tasmadar II, after Tyranid biohorrors ambushed Baron Dyrok's lands. Surging from the overgrown slopes of the valley known simply as the Gullet, a pair of huge serpentine beasts crippled the Baron's knight. With icy calm, Luxius coordinated a firing solution and unleashed a punishing salvo of rockets and gatling fire that ripped one beast apart. Her Knight Warden went blade to chitinous claw with the other Tyranid monster, sustaining heavy damage before finally decapitating the creature's head with a roaring Reaper chainsword. The lady and her knight stood guard over their damaged comrades for a further 8 solar hours, seeing off predatory waves of biobeasts before relief finally reached the Gullet. For their magnificent deed of valor, both Luxius and her steed were greatly honored, their systems and panoply restored to full magnificence before the final push to liberate the planet. Of all the varied types of Imperial knights seen upon the battlefields of the 42nd millennium, the Knight Errant is best known as a devastating close-range killer, a tank hunter extraordinaire. Enemy armor is quickly melted to no more than a pile of molten slag by the thermal cannon slung underneath a Knight Errant's mighty shoulders. Once a foe is sighted, a Knight Errant typically seeks to close the distance, firing off hissing blasts from his thermal cannon as its great strides propel the walker rapidly forward. Thanks to their size, thick adamantium armor, and directional ion shield, Knights Errants don't hesitate to charge straight into the teeth of the enemy's most potent weapons. Once amongst its foe, a lone Knight Errant can best an entire tank battalion, shooting and stabbing its way through the formation to leave only twisted ruins and blackened hulls in its wake. The Knight Errant is a mainstay of many knightly houses. The strength of the knightsuit is perfectly matched with the aggressive, charge-at-the-foe nature of its pilots. It is a cyclical relationship. For over thousands of years, the combative nature of the pilot has a residual effect upon the machine spirit of the knightsuit, making the machine's sentience bolder still, and so each new noble pilot perpetuates and contributes to this eternal pattern. At the beginning of a battle, a Knight Errant invariably chooses to close in with his foe, and any enemy that is not dispatched by his blast from his deadly thermal cannon are quickly put to rest by the Knight's Reaper chainsword. It is a trial that few creatures, or war engines, no matter how massive or well-armored, can survive. The adamantium teeth of the Reaper blade can churn through ferrocrete bunkers, or rip open a super-heavy battle tank. Some Knight Errants choose a Thunderstrike gauntlet over the Great Blade, using the unmatched power of its grip to bludgeon foes to the ground, to crush the innards of a living creature, or to rip limbs from the enemy titan. Such is the weapon's power of a Thunderstrike gauntlet, that tanks can even be flipped over or hurled aside to roll and crash amongst the knight's foes. The extra carapace mounting allows Knight Errants to bear another weapon, including an anti-aircraft twin Icarus autocannon, in addition often included by tech priests that expect to operate beneath enemy-controlled skies. A Knight Errant often spearheads attacks, and by the battle's end, they will have smashed and carved their bloody way into the very thickest of the fighting. Even protected by their armor and their ion shield, battle damage is common for such venerable engines of war. After each action, the hulking giants are literally crawling with sacrosanct, for most knightly houses uphold the tradition that post-battle, a knight should not be seen with so much as a single scratch upon its livery. The ancient machines are lovingly cared for, with attention paid to every armor plate. No less scrutiny is spent ensuring that the knight's personalized heraldry is likewise maintained, for the symbols it incorporates proclaim everything that the noble takes pride in, including his homeworld, house, oath, rank, and most lauded battle honors. While all knight houses make use of the Knight Errant pattern armor, perhaps none are so feared as those that fight for Forge-World Lucius. While unable to replicate the teleportation abilities bestowed upon the Titans of Legal Storeroom, the legendary Warp Runners, the tech priests have had some limited success in sending smaller units. And those were 40 facts on the Imperial Knights. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. What really grinds my gears about the Imperial Knights is when you get to this level of like the most basic lore, they're very boring. They're very bland. And that's because the tabletop kind of has to take over the lore. Whereas like You could have different varieties of Imperial knight suits and have like different suits that you can purchase in store. But what GW was trying to do is just like create 1 or 2 boxes and have a variety of different variances within that one box that you purchase. So it's something common that they do in mostly like all factions. It's just that because the Imperial Knight faction is so elite, like you really only have the option of buying an Imperial Knight and then giving him the different name, basically. So if you want a gallant, a crusader, a paladin, it's really just the weapon that's changing. It's not until you get to Forge World that you get like the different looks of the Imperial Knights. Now when it comes to the fluff and the lore, you kind of have to understand this most basic part before you jump over to like the cool stuff, like how do you pilot an Imperial Knight, which we have a 40 facts video on. Check it out, I'll link it up above. But like the different knightly houses and like the culture of a knight world, those are all like really interesting things about the 40k lore, or the Imperial Knight lore, that you can check out. I'll put a link up above. We've talked about basically feudal societies within the 40k universe, so even though it's sci-fi, like you still get that feeling of like knights in shining armor, battling creatures, and all this kind of cool stuff, which we have videos on and we'll continue to talk about in the near future. If you guys have suggestions for any other topics of Warhammer 40k that you guys would like us to cover, please comment down below. If you guys enjoy our content, thank our patrons on Patreon. Objective markers in the description below if you guys want to pick that up for the holiday season. It helps us out, and then you guys get a cool little treat from One Mind Syndicate. Yeah, thanks so much for listening, guys, and I'll talk to you guys in the comment section. This was Gershwin with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.